Thank you for having me today. It's always a pleasure to engage with the medical students and the Alumni Association.
Yeah. Prof, before I move on, so you graduated from Master of Surgery in FOM of UM back in 2003, which was 20 years ago. Was there any difference back then and now? And can you share us a little bit about your experience?
So actually, my working life in relation to University of Malaya started even before then, because I actually completed my housemanship in what was known then as the University Hospital. And the situation was very, very different at the time. All the house officers were actually resident, so we actually lived in the hospital itself. The 14th floor was actually the house officer residences. And we were expected to actually be available every day, all day. And we were working what was called the Cinderella shifts, because basically whether or not you were on call, you were expected to tend to your patients up until midnight of every day. So, you would go down and do the ward rounds, you would administer the drugs, etc., up until midnight, because your on-call colleagues would have to deal with all the emergency admissions. So we were all Cinderellas in those days. And we were doing something like 9 to 10 calls a month, which is not like now. Now you sort of do the shifts. So we would actually have to work the 36 hours straight, and then you have perhaps that evening after midnight you would be able to sleep, but then you would have to come back into work the next day. So it was very, very different. When I joined, and also at that time in general surgery, there was only one associate professor and there was one senior lecturer. So that was the size of the general surgical service. So a lot of the service was actually provided by the medical officers. When I joined the master's program, that would have been in 1999, the size of general surgery had increased a little bit. So there were more consultants and there were more specialists, but the intake of the master students was quite small compared to today. So in my batch, there were 7 in the intake. But remember that we had to also serve the non-general surgical specialties as well. So, we would be farmed out to cardiothoracic or neurosurgery, etc. And so the amount of work was actually quite a lot. I remember being in the cardiothoracic division, and there were only 2 of us, so we were doing 15 calls a month. One of my colleagues was in pediatric surgery. He was the only medical officer there, so he was basically resident continuously for 4 months. So I think in terms of the staffing, it was certainly much less than what we have now. Having said that, the volume of work has increased significantly. So if I give an example, when I was training, in 1 year, perhaps we would have about 40 colorectal cancers in a year. And now we have probably about 150 to 200. So the volume of work has definitely increased. Therefore, while we have increased in numbers now, both in terms of the medical officers as well as the clinical staff, the volume of work has also increased. The subspecialization of work has increased. The complexity of the work has increased. So we're still as busy, if not busier, than ever. So as you can imagine, during training and even now, we spend a lot of our lives in the workplace, in the hospital or in the faculty.
It sounds pretty tiring, but I can imagine how much that the University Hospital has progressed since then. And yeah, currently we are actually quite serving many patients yearly, I see. And yeah, Prof. So back when you were in undergraduates back in University of Wales, were you as busy as when you were practicing a master's as well? And was there any like canteen to cater for the undergraduate students back then?
The University of Wales program then was structured a little differently from what you are experiencing now. So you have a fairly integrated system. At the time, this was in the mid 1990s, medical schools were just starting to, sort of incorporate integration of preclinical and clinical programs in their medical degrees. So in the University of Wales, what happened was that the preclinical training actually took place in what was called the College of Cardiff at the time. So this is where all the preclinical staff and the faculty facilities were located, and it was actually physically separate from the clinical facilities. Okay, so that was the first thing. And then once you got into the clinical years, the training occurred in many different parts of Wales. It wasn't just in Cardiff, it's under the College of Medicine. And while the main teaching hospital was located in the Heath, which is in Cardiff itself, we were also rotated to many other hospitals. So I think that the parallel with the program is that, you used to have postings in Klang Hospital, for instance, in HTAR, and then also previously we used to send to Banting, but that's only 2 hospitals. We were actually sent throughout the whole of Wales. So it's a bit like being posted to hospitals across Selangor, the whole of Selangor, So physically, we were often separated and scattered. So in the preclinical years, the only time the whole batch would get together was for lectures. And once you were in the clinical years, there were very few sessions where the entire cohort, the entire batch would be physically together. Okay. In terms of residences as well, many of us actually lived off-site. There wasn't actually a campus as such. So many of us lived in, rented residences. There were, of course, residential colleges, just like your KK6, but the only residence that was really dedicated for medical students was located next to the Heath Hospital. Okay, and that was mainly for clinical students. So the preclinical students didn't live there. In my 2 preclinical years, I actually lived in another residential college, which was called Aberdare Hall. But that was mixed, so I was together with students from other programs as well.
Prof, just was wondering, did you miss Malaysian food, and did you have any Malaysian friends over there as well?
So I went as part of a cohort of JPA scholars. All right, so there were a few other Malaysians as well. However, in the medical program there in Cardiff, for my batch, there were 3 of us. And we were very fortunate because, there were other senior Malaysian students as well. And because we were scholars, our travel and arrival had been coordinated with the student body in Cardiff. So they had something called the Malaysia-Singapore Students Association. So in that sense, our arrival and our settling in was actually facilitated by our senior students. So that helped a lot. It also meant that we were given advice as to where we could source Asian foods and ingredients, because the situation then was very different from now. Now you can get virtually anything that you want in any major city in the UK. But at the time, there were only very few specialty stores, and you had to know where to go to obtain Asian ingredients and condiments. Okay. The other thing that was very, very different then is that the opening hours for shops was very, very restricted. So by about 5 or 6 in the evening, everything shut, right? And on weekends, Saturday, Sunday, nothing is open. Okay, so if you didn't know this, you could actually be stuck with no food on the weekend, right? Unless of course you were living in a residential hall, and then of course there they would have their own kitchen, and you were provided, they didn't provide 3 square meals. It's 2 square meals. So you would have breakfast and you would have dinner, but everything else you had to source yourself.
That sounds like a very interesting experience actually. Prof, so basically, due to this pandemic, a lot of things has been fairly quite bad. And for the students as well, we have been trying to get the students a way that in order to a facility that they could source them as well, because currently because of the MCO, stores also shut down very fast at 8 o'clock and so on. So, Prof, because we are coming up with the kitchen for the college, what do you envision it to be like, and what do you think that should be in that particular kitchen and so on?
Yeah, firstly, I would say that we can't underestimate the importance of having good nutrition. Okay, I mean, we work in a very high risk industry, high risk in the sense of we are responsible for other people's health. And in order to discharge our duties well, we have to be healthy ourselves. And there's a lot of literature out there, as to how doctors are really very bad at looking after themselves. On top of that, if you're looking at students, and particularly medical students, in order for you to learn effectively, we know that physical deficiencies or deficits impact your academic or scholastic achievements. And so I think it's incredibly important that you're able to have a reliable and healthy source of nutrition close by. So I would envision that this kitchen is, almost like the hub of KK6, because this is where all of you will come together at meal times, where it's hopefully not so stressful, and that you'll be able to bond over something which is, that Malaysians enjoy very much, which is food. But I hope also that the diet that is available is nutritionally sound while still remaining tasty and authentic for everyone. And I hope there will be a variety of menus available for everyone.
Speaking of healthy diet, Prof, do you have any particular food recipe that you want to share with us?
Well, as you can imagine, I don't spend very much time in the kitchen now, although I used to enjoy cooking very much. And so, whenever we do prepare anything at home now, it has to be something that is relatively quick and easy to prepare, and doesn't rely on a very fixed number or type of ingredients. And so what I often like is that there are 2 main dishes that I will occasionally prepare from time to time. And the first one would be some sort of a pasta dish, because pasta is very, very easy to make. And then what you add to the sauce just depends on what you have at that point in time. So it's very, very, very adaptable. My 2 favorites would be some sort of tomato-based sauce, and then you add some kind of meat to it. And I think what's really, really important is you add lots of fresh herbs. And so I try to have that to hand, either store-bought, or you can actually have potted herbs, which is nice because you can keep it available for longer, and then you just use it as and when you require. My favorite herbs would be basil and Italian parsley. So I like those 2 in my pastas. The other sauce that I really, really like is green pesto. And this obviously I don't make from scratch now, although it's possible. So I just buy the store-bought pesto, and then you just throw it in with some garlic and chicken, bit of balsamic vinegar, lots of cracked black pepper, and that's really satisfying for me, and very, very quick to prepare. Doesn't take long at all. The other standby dish is chicken soup, which is really nice. When if I've come back after a long day of operating, you're in the operating theater, which is very cold, obviously, and you come back and you have to thaw out a little bit. This might be sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning, and so if there's chicken soup, it really helps to warm you up, and you can try to do it very authentically, and boil the chicken, etc. But when time is short and you want it to be done quickly, you can get store-bought chicken stock, either the liquid variety or even in a pinch, if you've got cubes, it actually works very well. And then you just throw in your onions, garlic, and whatever herbs that you have, plus lots and lots of vegetables. So I like to have lots of vegetables in my soup. Yeah, so very quick and easy, very satisfying, and nutritionally also sound.
Those are quite delicious recipes, actually. I also love chicken soup, actually. But last but not least, Prof, would you like to give us any advice to the college students currently who are living in KK6? Might it be clinical or anything personal also can? Could you give us one advice that you would like to share with us?
I would say that no matter how difficult the situation may seem, part of what makes us who we are as either medical students or potential future doctors is our resilience. I think that's a very important characteristic to have. And this is something that you can actually train, and a large part of it is actually not keeping things to yourself. So when you face difficulties, you face difficult situations, don't feel that you are alone in this. Reach out, whether it's to your friends, or you feel uncomfortable doing that, reach out to us, the staff in the faculty. And there are also other resources available to you. You just have to know where to access them. But basically that is it. Don't keep things to yourself. Don't feel that you have to deal with everything yourself. Things are much easier when we resource other people. We're all stronger together. So that would be my piece of advice.
Actually, thank you a lot, Prof, and also to the faculty as well, who have been taking care of us very well, and also trying the best to actually continue the program in the midst of this pandemic, actually. And yeah, thank you a lot, Prof, for sharing with us today. And I'm very grateful that you are able to join today. I have learned a lot from the past few minutes, actually. Thank you again, Prof.